He's the world's most famous podcaster, a comedian with a global audience, a lifelong martial artist, and of course, the UFC's color commentator. Joe Rogan is a man who has spoken at length to some of the most well-known people on the planet, including many of MMA's most revered figures. With that in mind, here's a look at what UFC fighters really think of Joe Rogan. Number 10. Nick Diaz. Some of you might not be aware of the fact that it was the legendary Nick Diaz who first uttered the similarly legendary train by day Joe Rogan podcast by night all day line that serves as the intro to every episode of Rogan's Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Diaz has just earned a major victory in his second UFC debut against BJ Penn, and upon being reunited with the famed podcast host, he used the opportunity to plug his interviewer's weekly show. Nick has generally always had high praise for Rogan, but upon revisiting the soundbite with his friends a few weeks later, Joe realized that Nick's uniquely delivered promo was the perfect introduction for the show. There's just something amazing about the way Nick stumbles through the line before ending with a random shout of "all day" to double down on his message.
Welcome back, and I can't wait to see you fight for the title.
What's up, train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Overall, this was one of the most organically hilarious moments that a fighter has shared with Joe Rogan. And like most fans who know of his backstory, hearing Nick Diaz's shout-out at the beginning of each episode of the world's most famous podcast is incredibly satisfying. Number 9. Chael Sonnen. Next, we turn our attention to the brief quarrel that emerged between Rogan and the former UFC middleweight and light heavyweight title challenger Chael Sonnen back in 2018. The problem stemmed from Rogan's habit of pulling back the curtain on Colby Covington, as the welterweight contender continued to offend and insult the entire UFC roster. Chael, being the showman that he is, thought it was incredibly wrong of Joe to do that, calling it a cardinal sin within the world of promotion. And while he claimed to have had a conversation over the phone with Rogan about this screw-up, the tone Sonnen took in the subsequent YouTube video made it clear that he was far from pleased with the commentator's decision-making.
I was so upset with Joe Rogan. For reasons that are unknown to me and that I will never understand, he decides to say that Colby Covington has come out and said crazy things to garner attention and get your pay-per-view money. To explain to you how wrong that was of Joe to do, I would need this entire show.
In the time since, the pair seem to have patched things up, and though Rogan still makes comments about Colby that could well be seen as similar, Sonnen has seemingly given up on trying to make a difference. Number 8. George St. Pierre. Some of the highest praise featured in this video for Rogan comes courtesy of the former UFC welterweight and middleweight champion George St. Pierre. You're certainly doing something right when you have one of the greatest mixed martial artists to have ever done it singing your praises. According to St. Pierre, Joe Rogan is the proud owner of the single greatest and most powerful spinning back kick he has ever seen.
But man, I never seen anybody hit as hard. Like, I don't care if it's a punch. I never see a blow from a human being that hard.
Joe, who has spent a lifetime engrossed in the martial arts, has managed to perfect his technique over the years, bringing a ridiculous level of force to the table with his spinning kicks in particular. GSP, whose own background is in karate, famously appeared in a viral video a few years ago that showcased Rogan teaching him step by step how he could improve his own technique. Say what you want about Joe and his many talents, but the fact that he can help a GOAT candidate like St. Pierre with his striking is truly something to behold. Even listening to the impact of his kicks hitting the bag paints a pretty vivid picture of just how lethal he is. It's a shame we never had a chance to see him compete in the UFC, eh? Number 7. Jacob Volkmann. Jacob Volkmann forever sealed his place in the history books with one of the most awkward post-fight interviews imaginable. And somehow, he came away blaming Joe Rogan for his own mishap. After sealing a big win for his career over Efrain Escudero, Volkmann managed to hand himself a major L after making a pretty terrible worded joke about his US President Barack Obama in his post-fight interview. Rogan, who admittedly could have helped him out, shot him a weird look and completely no-sold the joke, leaving Volkmann with something of a hostile reaction from the crowd. In his post-fight press conference, Volkmann expressed his anger at Joe Rogan, saying he wanted to punch him for leaving him hanging like that.
Oh, I thought Joe Rogan would laugh a little more. He kind of ruined it for me.
Kind of no-sold it, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He ruined it. I wanted to punch him in the nuts.
In reality, it was clear that Volkmann had made himself look quite silly, and in the time since, he has certainly come around to seeing the funny side of things. The lesson? Maybe rehearse your lines first, and when the time comes, be sure to read the room before you shoot your shot. Number 6. Quinton Rampage Jackson. Quinton Jackson has had a few issues with Joe Rogan's commentary over the years, ranging from his habit of sticking to a narrative he sees emerging, as well as his more specific criticisms of Rampage's own fighting style. Jackson has always been known as a very dangerous striker, a physically powerful man whose knockout ability was as terrifying as any light heavyweight of his era. Joe Rogan, as he called some of Quinton's biggest UFC fights, always made a point of describing Jackson's shortcomings on the ground, something that angered the 205-pounder to no end. Rampage went on to tell the world that he could easily beat Rogan up so long as he didn't let him get to the ground, because, as he put it, Joe's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is really good, which, though clearly tongue-in-cheek, still gives you an idea of where their relationship was at.
I think I beat the shit out of Joe Rogan. Long as he don't get me to the ground, because his jiu-jitsu is really good.
Yeah, he's got good jiu-jitsu.
That's what I know. You know he got good jiu-jitsu because he's so biased against jiu-jitsu guys. You can hear it in his voice. Whenever a guy is a jiu-jitsu fighter, Joe Rogan might as well be like playing the rusted trombone, like, he's a jiu-jitsu guy.
Eventually, the pair managed to patch things up and even share some fun post-fight moments in Rampage's later years. But for a while, there were few UFC fighters, if any, who had more criticism for Joe Rogan than this former champion. Remember, if you're enjoying our content and want to see more, be sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Number 5. Sean O'Malley. It's crazy to think just how young Sean O'Malley was when he burst onto the scene after impressing Dana White on his weekly Contender series. And though he has certainly found a few haters these days, fans in general were pretty high on O'Malley straight off the bat. And as his star power grew, an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast soon followed. When asked to reflect on that day a few years later, Sugar Sean explained how, at 22, he was the youngest guest to have ever appeared on the show, and after partaking in some of Rogan's highly effective cannabis, he and his coach Tim Welch were as high as can be, leaving the memory as something of a blur in his mind. However, when it comes to his opinion on Joe Rogan, O'Malley went in a pretty unique direction, giving Joe props for being one of his favorite people and simply stated that it would be a sad day when the world loses him.
Joe's gonna die someday, and that sucks, doesn't it? I think about that randomly when I get stoned. I'm like, holy shit, we're gonna lose Joe Rogan someday.
We're gonna lose everyone, dude.
Well, that's true, but
Let's just go.
Joe?
It's an odd way of saying you're a fan, but hey, we get where you're coming from, Sean. Number 4. Colby Covington. For a time, there was something of a minor beef growing between Rogan and the UFC welterweight contender Colby Covington, although it was definitely as one-sided as can be. Colby, at the time, was famously exchanging verbal barbs with his old roommate turned enemy John Jones. Rogan, being Rogan, took a moment on his podcast to warn Colby that maybe he shouldn't be picking on a guy who outweighs him by nearly 50 pounds. Colby, being Colby, threatened to slap Joe the next time he saw him. And obviously, given that Rogan has been in the fight game for several decades, he knew exactly how to take this, half-jokingly asking Colby if he would please reconsider and keep his hands to themselves.
Colby Covington, don't snap me. Don't slap me. I know you said you're gonna slap me. Don't slap me.
Overall, both guys knew what they were doing, and in the post-fight interviews and weigh-ins that followed this brief saga, it never looked as though Covington had any real intention of attacking the veteran commentator. Could you imagine how hilarious a scene it would have been if he did, though? Number 3. Khabib Nurmagomedov. One of the most widely requested guests for an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast is undoubtedly the unbeaten former lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. With such an intriguing backstory and a uniquely efficient fighting career, one could only imagine what revelations would come up if he were to lock horns with Joe Rogan for 2 or 3 hours in his podcast room. However, when asked for his stance on a future appearance, Nurmagomedov, who admitted he was a fan of the show, made it clear that he would rather improve his English to an even greater extent before he agreed to come on the show. Explaining this, the Eagle said that while he can fully express himself in his first language of Russian, conveying his thoughts in English is still quite a challenge for him, and he would rather wait until he is more proficient before accepting a spot on such a massive stage.
Yes, I watch Joe Rogan podcast a lot of time. He asked me a couple times. I really wanna go there, but before I go there, I wanna be ready. You know, I wanna be ready. I wanna improve my English a little bit more, and to explain people like what I have in my mind. You know.
And it makes sense. I guess we'll just have to wait for what promises to be one hell of an episode. Number 2. TYRON Woodley. Another fighter who has had more than a few criticisms of Joe Rogan's commentary over the years is the former longtime welterweight champion TYRON Woodley. The Chosen One's reign at the top of the 170-pound division was among one of the most divisive of its era, as Woodley skillfully managed to overcome some of the trickiest specialist matchups in the sport in Stephen Thompson and Damian Maia, albeit in fights that were seen as boring. Joe Rogan, after Woodley's UFC 214 defense against the BJJ wizard Maia, chose to highlight the fact that TYRON had won with the least strikes thrown in UFC championship history. To Woodley's defense, Maia had just repeatedly shot in for takedowns all fight, with TYRON stuffing them all. And when his post-fight press conference came around, the clearly annoyed champion called it a poor use of statistics.
No, I don't think it's slipping away. I mean, if he doesn't want to fight me, he doesn't want to fight me. What I take it as a poor usage of stats. That's like somebody in the wrestling community say, "Oh, he led the conference in escapes." That means he got his ass taken down 1,000,000 times and he got an escape.
In the past, Woodley had also been critical of Rogan for repeatedly bringing up his so-called cardio issues, while sticking to the narrative even if there was clearly nothing wrong. TYRON did have a habit of rubbing people the wrong way through his consistent complaining, but to say that the world of MMA has always been fair to him would be completely false. An underrated champion, but a truly odd figure in MMA history. Number 1. Conor McGregor. And finally, we come to the biggest star in the sport of MMA, a man who Joe Rogan actually congratulated all the way back in 2013 after he won his second Cage Warriors title with a masterclass victory over the formidable Ivan Bushinger. Seriously, if you haven't seen that win, check it out. And upon getting some very public praise from Rogan, McGregor responded in kind, giving respect to the legendary fight caller while making it clear that their paths would cross again. Jump forward 8 years and these two have shared some truly memorable moments. But the main question on a lot of our minds is whether or not Conor would ever appear on Rogan's podcast. Well, in a recent tweet during a fan Q&A, McGregor stated that he would absolutely be interested in doing so. If it ever became a reality, I think it's pretty safe to say that it would be by far and away the most popular episode of all time. And that will just about do it for this video. Again, if you enjoyed today's video and want to see more, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.